They asked for my name again, like I didn't belong. "Ma'am, please step aside." I heard the murmurs ripple through the crowd behind me, the rows of officers in ceremonial blues, the sharp edge of brass medals glinting in the sun. Mothers, wives, generals' daughters, all of them watching me. The woman in a simple navy dress, standing still at the top of the stairs outside the Pentagon's east entrance. I didn't flinch. I just offered my name again. Clearly, calmly. Evelyn Whitaker. "I'm on the guest list." My voice didn't shake, but my hand did. Not from nerves, but from the weight of everything unspoken between that name and this place. The soldier at the gate scanned his list again, hesitated, then whispered something into the mic at his collar. I saw it then, the flicker in his eyes. He recognized the name. But protocol trumped recognition. "I'm sorry," he said. "You're not authorized." There was a time when being a Whitaker opened every door in D.C. Today, it closed one. And not just any door. His door. My father's. Let me pause here, just for a moment. If you've ever stood in front of people who used to celebrate you, only to be met with silence, judgment, or worse, you'll understand why I didn't cry. I just stood there, eyes fixed ahead, because if I blinked too fast, I might lose the strength in my spine. If you've ever felt like the ghost in your own story, hit the subscribe button now. You're not alone. And stay. Because what they didn't know was this. I wasn't here just to watch. I was part of the ceremony. He just didn't know it yet. Behind the guards, a tall banner flapped in the summer wind. U.S. Medal of Valor honorees, 3rd Infantry Division. My husband's name was on that banner. And underneath it, in barely visible type, family members of honorees to be seated in Section B. Except someone made sure my name didn't make it to that list. I knew exactly who. You see, my father wasn't just attending today. He was giving the keynote. Colonel Richard Whitaker, retired. A legend in the Army, known for discipline, sharp speeches, and his obsessive sense of order, but never known for love. When I married Tom, a young, reckless corporal from Kentucky, my father said one thing and walked out. "You chose the wrong kind of man. Don't expect me to clean up after your mistakes." And with that, 26 years of being his daughter dissolved into silence. Not a word since. Not even when Tom was deployed. Not even when he came home broken. Not even when he saved 3 lives and earned the medal that would be pinned to his chest today. I took a deep breath and stepped aside like the guard asked. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I just walked, calmly, slowly, down the marble steps, heels tapping against stone like punctuation marks in a poem no one was ready to read. There was a small, shaded alcove to the left of the stage where staff and photographers lingered. I found a quiet corner there, my back to the wall, my eyes steady on the stage. And there he was, my father, silver-haired, sharp-jawed, dressed in a tailored suit that made him look more like a senator than a soldier. He didn't see me, not yet. But I saw him. The way he smiled at the generals, the way he shook hands with other families. And then, when he stepped to the microphone, his voice rang out like it always had. Crisp, confident, commanding. "We gather today not just to honor service, but to remember the price of integrity." I listened. Not as his daughter. As someone who had once believed every word he ever said. And now, didn't. There was no tremble in my chin. No tears. Only a stillness. A dignity I'd earned the hard way. He didn't know I had fought my own battles. With VA hospitals, with Tom's PTSD, with bills and late nights and loneliness. He didn't know that I had become someone I didn't recognize in the mirror. Stronger, quieter, sharper. I didn't need to shout to be heard anymore. Silence had become my weapon. And that silence was about to cut through a room full of medals and handshakes like a blade. Because there's something my father also didn't know. After Tom saved those soldiers in Mosul, his captain submitted not just his Medal of Valor paperwork, but also a special commendation request for the woman who fought beside him in a different war, the one back home. There was a second ceremony after the public one, a private award given by the Defense Secretary's office, one reserved for civilians who exemplified extraordinary support in the face of military sacrifice. It was rare, almost never granted. I hadn't told anyone, not even Tom. But the email came 2 weeks ago, and this morning, while my father rehearsed his keynote in the green room, I was inside, meeting with the deputy secretary and signing the clearance documents for my own commendation. Section B might have been full, but I wouldn't be sitting. I'd be standing on that stage. And not because of who my father was, because of who I had become. I saw them setting up the chairs for the honorees. I waited, calm, silent, until the MC stepped forward and began to read names. And when they called Sergeant Thomas Everett, I watched Tom rise, limping slightly from the injury that had nearly taken his leg, his uniform pressed and proud. He didn't look at me right away. He didn't know I was there, but when he stepped onto the platform and saw me waiting at the far end, behind the curtain, something changed in his face. Relief, surprise, and then, finally, peace. The announcer cleared his throat. We'd also like to honor a civilian whose unwavering commitment, care, and sacrifice represents the highest ideals of service. Evelyn Whitaker Everett, please come forward. Gasps, shifting seats, and in the front row, my father, his hands tightening into fists against his lap, the face of a man who no longer controlled the room. Not because I yelled, not because I fought, because I showed up, quiet, steady, uninvited, and undeniable. I walked up the steps without looking at him. The applause was polite, unsure, but I didn't need their certainty. I had my own. The medal they gave me was small, just a token. But the moment was enormous, because in that quiet space between his speech and my presence, I had rewritten the story, and I wasn't done yet. Before I was Evelyn Everett, the woman standing on that stage, medal-catching light I never asked for. I was just Evelyn Whitaker, daughter of a war hero, graduate of Georgetown, future diplomat, or so everyone assumed. My life was a carefully drawn blueprint. Wake at 6, run 3 miles, eat exactly 400 calories, smile just enough, never interrupt, always finish top of class, but don't appear too eager. It wasn't a life. It was a performance. And for years, I played it flawlessly. My father didn't raise daughters. He raised legacy pieces. I was proof of his perfection, polished, predictable, product of command. At state dinners, I stood by his side, dressed in navy or cream, nothing too loud, shaking hands with people who knew my name before I spoke it. She's just like her father, they'd say. And I'd smile, because that was the goal, wasn't it? But the truth was, I was nothing like him. I wrote poetry in the margins of my econ textbooks. I cried during national anthems, not from pride, but from longing. And sometimes, in the silence of my childhood bedroom, I imagined a life where I could be both soft and strong, where love wasn't a transaction for approval. Still, I clung to the belief that if I did everything right, eventually I'd earn his love, not just his pride. That was the assumption I carried like armor, that love, like medals, was awarded for merit. And if I was good enough, obedient enough, useful enough, he'd give it. I was 24 when I met Tom. He wasn't supposed to be there. A last-minute fill-in at a veterans policy panel where I was presenting on post-deployment resource gaps. I'd rehearsed my remarks for days, down to the minute. Tom was the real-life perspective, the panelist they added to bring heart to my data. He showed up late, still in uniform, hair slightly damp like he'd run to make it. When he sat beside me, his knee brushed mine. He apologized in a whisper and flashed me a smile that didn't ask for anything. And when it was his turn to speak, he didn't quote studies or statistics. He told the story of a boy who went overseas for college money and came home with a ghost in his chest. He talked about loneliness, about losing a friend to an IED, about his sister mailing him homemade cookies he couldn't eat because of nerves, and as he spoke, something inside me uncoiled. He wasn't polished, he wasn't approved, but he was real. And I had never wanted anything more. We got coffee after the panel, just once. Then again and again, always somewhere quiet. A corner bookstore, a bench near the canal, my cramped apartment kitchen where he fixed my broken faucet like it was second nature. When I told my father about Tom, I was cautious but proud. I thought he'd admire Tom's service, his raw discipline, the quiet strength beneath his easy humor. Instead, he stared at me like I'd cursed in church. "A corporal?" he said flatly. "You're dating a corporal?" I nodded. His silence stretched into something suffocating. "You think that's your future?" he asked. "I think he's my present," I said softly. And that's when he said it. Words that cracked something in me, not because they hurt, but because I recognized them as truth from his mouth. "You were bred for something better. Not loved, not chosen, bred." That was the first time I didn't try to change his mind. I just walked away, but it wasn't over. 3 weeks later, I got an invitation from the Department of State, the internship I had dreamed of for years. My application had been stagnant for months. Then suddenly, a letter with my name and a spot in Geneva. And underneath the letter, in fine ink, recommendation by Colonel Richard Whitaker, Ret. It was a gift, a bribe, a lifeline. When I told Tom, he smiled. "You have to go," he said. "This is your dream." But he didn't say it like he meant it, because dreams can't survive long distance when one person is still fighting ghosts. I was torn. And then I saw it, a printed itinerary on my father's desk. Flight, lodging, everything arranged, no conversation, just decisions. And that's when I realized this wasn't a gesture of belief. It was a rescue mission. He was trying to save me from myself, from the life I was choosing that didn't fit the Whitaker mold. I didn't go to Geneva. I married Tom, in a courthouse with one witness and a ring bought secondhand. I didn't wear white. I wore green, a soft, mossy dress that matched the trees outside. No photographers, no fanfare, and no family. When I called to tell my father, he didn't answer. When I emailed, it bounced back. When I sent a letter, it returned unopened. Just like that, 26 years of obedience, excellence, and daughterhood. Gone. At first, I thought he'd come around, that he'd cool off, see the man Tom was, that maybe when the holidays rolled around, or when we had kids someday, something would soften. But weeks turned into seasons, and silence hardened into policy. Tom never asked me to choose. But I felt the cost in every paycheck, every broken pipe we had to fix ourselves, every look from people who used to know me as Colonel Whitaker's daughter and now whispered military wife with that patronizing tone. I got a job as a research assistant at a nonprofit for veterans' families. Nothing glamorous, nothing headline-worthy, but it felt real. We lived in a 2-bedroom walk-up with cracked tiles and a leaky fridge, but it was ours. We fought about bills, about dishes, about whether the cat should be allowed on the couch. But we laughed more than we cried. And I was happy. Quietly, stubbornly happy. Even if my old life, the polished halls of diplomacy and power, looked at me like I'd vanished. But sometimes at night, when Tom was deployed, I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had been foolish. If I'd thrown away everything for a kind of love that wouldn't last. If my father was right. If legacy and love couldn't live in the same house. Still, every letter Tom sent, every call from base, every whispered, "I miss you," when he didn't know I was listening, rebuilt my conviction, until the day everything cracked. And that is where this story really begins. The last time I heard Tom's voice before everything unraveled, he was laughing through static. "We got mail call today. I finally got your care package, babe. That coffee saved my life." I smiled into the phone, pacing the apartment barefoot, holding the receiver like it was his hand. He told me about the new medic in his unit, how they'd finally gotten clean socks, how the nights were cold, but the sunrise over the desert made it worth it. I told him about the cat knocking over a lamp, about the neighbor's kid learning to ride a bike, about nothing really, but everything. "I love you," I said. He said it back, and then the call cut off, just like always, sharp, abrupt, leaving a silence far too loud. 3 days later, the knock came. 2 men, one in uniform, the other in a dark suit with the Department of Defense badge clipped to his chest. I didn't faint. I didn't scream. I stood in the doorway while they told me Tom had been injured in an explosion during a convoy run. Survivable, but serious. He'd been stabilized and was en route to a military hospital in Germany. And then, the twist. "There's also a matter of protocol," the man in the suit said, clearing his throat. "There was a security incident involving your husband's service record. Some inconsistencies." I blinked. "Inconsistencies?" He looked uncomfortable. "We're reviewing who had access to certain files. It's likely procedural. But until then, certain benefits and communications may be restricted." Restricted. I felt that word pierce through me like cold metal. In the days that followed, I lived in a kind of limbo. Tom was alive, but unreachable. I wasn't authorized for updates beyond basic condition reports. The Red Cross gave me what scraps they could, but even they were limited. I called every contact I had in the military. No one returned my calls. Then came the letter, a formal document, not from the hospital, not from the Army, from the Office of Personnel Management. It was addressed to me, but written like I was a stranger. "Mrs. Evelyn Whitaker Everett, your security clearance access has been flagged for review due to an ongoing internal investigation involving classified records associated with your spouse's deployment." I reread it 3 times before I realized what they were saying. They thought I was the breach. I was the one who'd accessed files. I was the one being investigated. Except I hadn't. I didn't even know how. I'd worked with veteran policy data, sure, but never classified documents, never anything close to Tom's unit operations. I hadn't even touched a military server in months. And yet, the implication was clear. Someone had used my name, my credentials, to look into files they shouldn't have. And now Tom's benefits, his care, were being held in limbo because of it. I reached out to my father, not because I wanted to, but because I had no one else. I left a message, then another. Then finally I emailed, "Please. I think something is seriously wrong. I need your help. I don't know who to trust." He responded 3 hours later. One line. "Actions have consequences, Evelyn." No signature, no warmth, just a sentence that felt like a slap. That's when the panic set in. I wasn't just cut off, I was now suspect. Not in the legal sense, not yet. But in every hallway I walked through at work, people stopped talking when I passed. My boss asked for a private word, then suggested I take some time off, for my mental health. HR froze my system access. Emails stopped coming. And slowly, even the neighbors stopped saying hello. Isolation isn't loud. It's quiet. It's 100 small goodbyes that no one says out loud. A week later, I received a letter from Tom's mother. A real letter. Ink on paper. It was cold, formal. She had never liked me, not really. But I hadn't expected this. Given the current situation and the stress it's caused Thomas, we believe it's best for you to stay away from the hospital until everything is resolved. We are handling his care. Please respect our wishes. I sat at the kitchen table, holding that letter with both hands, as if letting go of it would make it vanish. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at it until the words blurred into gray. My world had collapsed, but not with noise. With the slow, smothering weight of silence. I went to bed that night fully dressed. Shoes still on. Couldn't remember eating. Didn't care. Somewhere between midnight and morning, I got up, walked to the bathroom, stared at my reflection. I didn't recognize her. The woman in the mirror had dull eyes and clenched lips and shadows where light used to live. I touched the glass, like maybe she would reach back. But she didn't. She just stood there, empty. I packed a bag the next day. Not much. A few clothes, my journal, a book I'd never finished, no phone, no laptop, just a train ticket. I didn't tell anyone. There was no one left to tell. I left a note in the apartment. I need quiet. I'll be safe. Don't look for me. Then I disappeared. Not just from DC, not just from the headlines, but from myself. Because sometimes the betrayal isn't just being abandoned. It's realizing that every assumption you built your life on, that love is earned, that truth protects you, that goodness is noticed, was a lie. And when that illusion breaks, so do you. The train took me south, not for any reason except the tracks pointed that way. I picked a stop no one would think to check, a town so small it didn't bother with taxis or streetlights past midnight. The kind of place where strangers don't stay long, and no one asks why you arrived. I rented a one-room cabin behind a gas station that doubled as a grocery store. Cash only. The man who handed me the keys didn't ask for ID. I didn't offer one. I told him my name was Eve, short for Evelyn, but also not. Something I could wear without feeling like it belonged to someone else. There was no internet, no cell signal unless you stood near the dying maple tree out back. That suited me fine. I stopped checking the news, stopped reaching for my phone, stopped looking in mirrors. Mornings bled into afternoons with no punctuation. I swept floors, cooked eggs, read the same page of a novel 3 times and forgot what it said. There was a small radio in the corner. I kept it off. Silence was easier than voices I didn't trust. No one knew me here, which meant no one expected anything. I became invisible in plain sight. The quiet woman who walked to the market at dawn and avoided eye contact. No makeup, no jewelry. Hair tied back with the same elastic every day until it broke and I used a shoelace instead. I stopped asking questions, stopped remembering, stopped dreaming, and still, the ache didn't go away. It settled in my ribs like something lodged beneath bone, a pressure that wasn't pain, just presence. A dull, constant reminder that something had been taken from me, and I wasn't sure if I wanted it back. Some nights, I didn't sleep at all. Just sat on the porch and watched fog rise from the ground like a slow exhale. It looked like the land was trying to forget too. The journal I brought stayed shut. Every time I opened it, the words stuck. Everything I had been, the daughter, the wife, the advocate, felt like a coat I couldn't wear anymore. Too tight, too stained, too cold. I remember the first time I saw her. A girl, maybe 10, sitting on the steps of the gas station. Dirty sneakers, tangled hair, eating a popsicle even though it was barely 40 degrees. She stared at me like I was a puzzle, then asked, "Are you a runaway?" I blinked. She shrugged. "You look like one." I didn't answer, but something in her voice, curious, unafraid, cracked the air. Her name was Josie. She lived in the trailer park down the road with a mother who worked double shifts and a father who wasn't around much. She started waiting for me in the mornings, like a stray cat who decided I was safe. I tried not to encourage her, but she kept showing up. Once, she handed me a crumpled flower she'd picked from the side of the road. "Looks like you," she said. Kind of bruised, but still here. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I did neither. Instead, I took the flower and placed it in an old mug by the sink. It wilted in 2 days. I didn't throw it away. One afternoon, after a particularly gray morning where even the birds seemed quiet, I sat on the edge of my bed and thought about stopping. Not dying exactly, just disappearing a little more, fading until there was nothing left to ask of me. No more food, no more walks. No more brushing my teeth or washing my clothes or pretending I was someone who might still matter. Just stillness, heavy, thick, final. I stared at the floor for what felt like hours. And then, a knock. 3 soft raps against the screen door. Not urgent, not afraid, just there. I didn't answer at first. I didn't move, but the knocking came again, followed by a voice. "I brought you something," Josie said. I heard her sit down on the porch. "It's not much, but I made it." I opened the door a crack. She was cross-legged, holding a folded piece of paper in her lap and a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in napkins. "I used the good jelly," she said. I sat beside her without a word. She handed me the sandwich like it was a treasure. I didn't have the heart to tell her I hadn't eaten properly in days. Then she gave me the paper. It was a drawing, crayon, haphazard, full of joy. 2 stick figures standing on a porch under a crooked sun. One had long hair. The other was small but smiling. "This is you and me," she said. "You're the quiet hero." I stared at that paper like it was a lifeline. Because for her, someone small, someone with nothing to gain, I was still someone. I didn't know what to say, so I said what I hadn't said in weeks. "Thank you." She leaned her head against my arm. "Sometimes I wish I could vanish too," she whispered. "But maybe it's better if we take turns." Something in my chest shifted. Not much. Just enough to breathe again. Later that night, I lit a candle. The kind I'd packed months ago but never used. Sandalwood and bergamot. The scent Tom used to say reminded him of home. I sat by the window and stared into the flame. It flickered like doubt. Or hope. I found the journal beneath my bed. Opened it to the middle. Not the beginning. That part belonged to someone else. And I wrote one line. "Still here." That was it. But it was more than I'd written since the day I left. The next morning, I combed my hair, washed the mug with the dead flower, walked to the gas station and bought eggs. The man behind the counter nodded, said, "Haven't seen you smile before." I hadn't noticed I had. Josie waved at me from across the lot. I waved back. I wasn't ready to return. Not to DC, not to Tom, not to the version of me that shattered. But something had opened. Not a door. Not yet. Just a crack. A thread of light. And sometimes, that's all it takes. The first job I took was cleaning rooms at a roadside inn. It wasn't glamorous. No office, no nameplate. Just gloves, bleach, and silence. But something about it felt right. I could disappear in the rhythm, the swipe of cloth across wood, the scent of lemon cleaner, the order I could create when everything else had fallen apart. No one cared who I was. Only that the beds were made tight and the bathrooms sparkled. There was freedom in that. And slowly, something in me shifted. My hands got stronger. My posture straightened. I began to move with purpose again, not rushing, not hiding, but choosing. I stopped avoiding mirrors. Not because I loved what I saw, but because I wanted to see her come back. The woman behind my own eyes. She wasn't the same. She wasn't trying to be. By month 4, I'd saved enough for a prepaid phone. Not to scroll, not to call home, just to read, to search, to understand. At night, I sat on the porch with that phone and traced my own digital shadow. I looked up the investigation, found news articles, blogs, a few angry threads on military forums speculating about Tom's medal delay. But one name kept showing up, buried deep in footnotes and procurement memos. Charles Chip Winthrop, a senior civilian analyst with clearance to personnel files. He had once been a liaison for my father's post-retirement consulting work. I remembered him from dinners. Soft-spoken, balding, always deferential to my father. I hadn't thought of him in years, until I found an archived document listing me as a secondary access point in a restricted file Chip had reviewed. I sat there, staring at the screen, heart thudding. That was the breach. He had used my credentials. Someone close to my father had logged in under my name, which meant someone had given him that access. Someone who still had control. I could feel the old panic rise, the sense of helplessness. But this time I didn't freeze. I wrote it all down. Dates, names, inconsistencies. I cross-checked every document I could access. And the more I dug, the more patterns emerged. Small, subtle manipulations, not enough to trigger alarms, but enough to delay benefits, stall metals, freeze communications, and all of them traced back to a single gatekeeper: my father. He hadn't just walked away from me. He had ensured no one else could walk toward me. It wasn't vengeance. It was control. And he had used the one weapon I could never compete with: his reputation. But now, something in me refused to bow. One morning, I walked into the local library, a single room with more dust than books, and asked the librarian if she needed help. She blinked, then laughed. No one's asked that in 10 years. Within a week, I had a key to the place. Within a month, I was running a weekly veteran spouse support group. 3 women at first, then 7. I called it Silent Ranks, for the women who fought wars no one saw. We didn't fix anything, but we listened. And that, I'd learned, was its own kind of power. One woman, Maria, had lost her husband to suicide. Another, Lila, was raising 2 kids while hers was on his 5th deployment. We shared resources, emails, stories. We became each other's net. One evening, Lila pulled me aside. "You should do more with this," she said. "You've got fire under all that stillness." I smiled. "I don't think I'm ready." She shrugged. "Then maybe it's time to stop waiting to be." That night, I stayed up until dawn drafting a proposal for a rural outreach initiative. Veteran families, education, civilian re-entry support. Everything I'd once tried to fix with policy memos in D.C., now reborn in real human terms. I submitted it under the name E. Whitaker Everett. Both names, all the weight, no hiding. A month later, I was invited to present it at a regional conference for military family organizations. I borrowed a blazer, took the bus, printed handouts at the library. And when I stood behind that podium, voice steady, shoulders square, I felt something I hadn't in over a year. Presence. Not pride, not vengeance. Just quiet ownership of who I had become. After the talk, a woman approached me. She was with the Defense Secretary's Civilian Affairs Office. "You should consider applying for the Commendation Award," she said. "Your story, it matters." I almost laughed. I told her it wasn't a story, it was just survival. She smiled. "Exactly." I went home and stared at the paperwork for 3 days before filling it out. Every word felt like peeling back old skin, raw, tender, true. I included everything: the breach, the silence, the fall, and the rise. 2 weeks later, I received an email. They wanted to nominate me, alongside Tom. It felt surreal, to be named, to be seen, but that wasn't the moment I knew I'd come back. That came on a Wednesday morning, when I opened the mailbox and found a plain white envelope. No return address, just one sheet inside. A formal withdrawal of the investigation against me. And beneath it, a note, unsigned. "It wasn't your fault. I knew. But I let them believe it. I didn't need a signature. I knew the handwriting. Chip. Which meant he'd confessed. Or someone had found him. Either way, the system that once silenced me had cracked. And I hadn't screamed. I had simply refused to disappear. I pinned that letter to the inside of my closet door. Not out of pride, out of memory. Because people forget women like me. Quiet women. Steady women. The ones who burn without flames. And I wanted to remember. They thought I was gone. I was just becoming impossible to ignore. The sun was cruel that day. Not hot, just sharp. Everything shimmered. The marble steps. The brass buttons on uniforms. The illusion of order. I arrived early, just as the ceremony crew was still taping nameplates to the rows of folding chairs. Section B, once denied to me, now bore my name. But I wouldn't be sitting. I wore gray, not black, not white, neutral, steady. A shade that didn't beg for notice, but made you look twice when the light hit it right. The guest list was longer this time. Officials, journalists, families, and seated in the front row, exactly as I expected, was my father. He hadn't seen me yet. His back was straight, his hands folded in military stillness. I'd studied that posture my entire childhood, a fortress built from control. But today, I had no intention of asking entry. This wasn't about being let in. It was about standing where he couldn't ignore me. At 11:02 a.m., the announcer welcomed everyone. She called it a joint commendation presentation, an honor given to both active service members and civilians whose impact had reached beyond measurable duty. And then she said our names: Sergeant Thomas Everett and Evelyn Whitaker Everett. There was a pause. People turned. Eyes scanned the crowd. They expected someone polished, someone safe. Instead, they got me. I walked the aisle alone, slowly, deliberately, each step a sentence in the story he never thought I'd tell. And when I passed my father, I felt it, the stiffness in his jaw, the twitch in his brow. He knew. He just didn't know how much I knew. They pinned Tom's medal first. He stood proud, tears in his eyes, his body steadier than it had been in months. And when he turned to face me, he mouthed one word: finally. Then it was my turn. I stepped forward to accept the commendation, but instead of walking away after the applause, I turned back toward the microphone. I wasn't supposed to be here, I said, my voice even. Not today, not ever. A hush fell. My clearance was revoked without explanation. My communications were blocked. My husband's care was delayed. And for over a year, I was silenced by a lie. Whispers began to ripple. I took a breath and continued. But I'm not here to relive that. I'm here to name it, so it doesn't happen to the next woman too quiet to be believed. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a manila envelope. Unsealed. Ready. These are copies of internal memos, login records, testimonies, everything that shows who accessed my name, who used it, and who looked away. I handed them to the woman from the secretary's office. She opened the folder slowly. Her eyes scanned the first page, then the second. She stiffened. Gasps. One from the second row. A name read aloud under breath. A chair scraped against concrete. Then, stillness. I didn't have to say my father's name. It was there, in ink, on logs. Time-stamped access granted to his associate. Retired Colonel Richard Whitaker listed as consulting advisor in the clearance trail. He had tried to bury me with silence. Now he was being unearthed by documentation. I turned to face him. He hadn't moved. But I could see the cracks. His fists were clenched, his chin tilted higher, as if posture might shield him from exposure. But his eyes, those always commanding eyes, darted for an exit that didn't exist. No one spoke to him. No one offered comfort. Even Chip, sitting 3 seats down, stared at the ground. This was not an arrest. There were no handcuffs, no spectacle. But it was a dismantling. A man who had built his legacy on precision and discipline now sat under the full weight of a truth he couldn't command. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply said, "You could have stood beside me. Instead, you chose control over compassion. And now, you have neither." That was the moment. The mirror. He saw not just what he had done. He saw who he had become. And he saw who I now was. Someone who didn't beg. Someone who didn't bend. Someone who had walked through fire and rebuilt herself with the ashes. I nodded once, then stepped away from the mic. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. The silence said everything. Later, as I moved through the reception area, all polite clinks of glasses and murmured respect, people stopped me. Not to gossip. To thank me. One woman pressed a card into my hand. "We've needed someone to speak like this for a long time," she said. "I hope you'll keep going." I looked down at the card. Veterans Advocacy Division, Civilian Oversight Panel. I smiled. I already started. In the corner of the room, I saw my father rise. He walked to the exit alone. No one followed. No one called out. He didn't look back. I didn't stop him, because I didn't need to win. I just needed to be seen. And now, no one could unsee me. Spring came late that year. I noticed it first in the wind, warmer, less sharp, then in the way the sunlight lingered longer through the windows of our apartment. And finally, in the scent of lilacs, pushing their way up through the cracks behind the building like they had somewhere to be. I'd moved back, but not to D.C. Tom and I found a house 2 hours outside the city, in a town with one grocery store, one bookstore, and too many birdsong mornings to count. He still walked with a slight limp. I still caught myself checking shadows for memories. But we laughed again. And that was enough. I started writing again, not for policy, not for reports, just stories. Stories of women who were overlooked, who vanished, who came back stronger. At night, I lit the same sandalwood candle and filled pages in silence. It was like returning to a version of myself I'd once been afraid to claim. One afternoon, while sorting a drawer we hadn't touched since we moved in, I found it, the photo. Me at 23, standing beside my father at a military gala. He wore his medals. I wore expectation like a necklace. We looked like allies. We weren't. I stared at it for a long time. Then I folded it once, slid it into an envelope, and walked to the field behind the house. There was an old tree stump there, gnarled, gray, and hollowed at the center. I tucked the envelope inside and walked away, not because I needed to forget, because I'd already forgiven myself. There was no press release about his resignation, just a quiet line in an agency newsletter thanking him for his service and noting his early departure. No drama, just absence. That's how justice works sometimes. It moves through systems like a slow river, not loud, but inevitable. He never reached out. I didn't expect him to. Some endings don't need conversations, just distance. One Saturday, I returned to the community center where I'd first run that support group. They'd turned it into a full program now. Grants, volunteers, local press. They asked me to speak. I almost said no, but Tom squeezed my hand and said, "Your voice helped me walk again. Maybe someone else needs it now." So I did. Not a speech, just a story. I spoke of absence, of silence, of learning that sometimes power doesn't roar, it breathes. And how healing isn't loud, it's steady, like tide, like breath, like women rebuilding their names. Afterward, a little girl came up to me, maybe 10 years old, hair in braids, oversized army jacket hanging off her shoulders. She looked up at me like I was made of stars. "My mom said you used to be invisible," she whispered. "Not anymore," I said, kneeling beside her. She nodded. "I'm gonna be loud and kind, like you." I smiled. "You don't have to be loud. Just don't disappear." She reached into her backpack and gave me a drawing. 2 stick figures, one with a medal. I kept it. Later that night, I sat on the porch and opened my journal to the last page. I didn't write a conclusion. I just drew a circle. Complete, unbroken. Because this wasn't a revenge story. It was a return. And as the breeze brushed past me, soft and sure, I knew. Some women don't rise to fight. They rise to become the silence no one dares to ignore.